Our speaker tonight is Dr. Alex Hirschberg. Dr. Hirschberg is a clinical psychologist and founder of Hirschberg Behavioral Health Services. He spent the last several years providing consultation, professional development, and assessment services for dozens of districts across Massachusetts. And he received his doctorate from Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology. The AMSA School Counseling Department has had the distinct pleasure of getting to know Dr. Hirschberg over the last few years, and we're thrilled to have him here with us this evening. And without further ado, over to Dr. Hirschberg. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate, and good evening, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you here virtually. My name is Alex Hirschberg, and I'm a clinical psychologist. I've had it's been just a fantastic opportunity for me to work with the counseling department at AMSA, a very talented and bright group who are working really hard to support the social and emotional wellness of AMSA students. The talk that I'm giving today, I've entitled Prepare the Child for the Road, Not the Road for the Child, right? And we're going to be talking about resilience and the need for a systematic approach for preparing students to manage the inevitable stressors that they're going to face in life. And so let's jump in. So first, just a little bit about me. I am a parent of two kids. My oldest is 13 and my youngest is 11, almost 12. So they would be at towards the beginning of their AMSA journey. So it's all middle school stuff all the time. And as a parent, one of the messages that I got early on is that my job as a parent was to help my child be happy, right? That a good parent is someone that tries to shield their child from distress, to make sure that they're comfortable, to make sure that they're feeling good. And there's a lot of messages out there in our culture today as parents that sort of share that message. And I maybe internalized that a little bit too much during my early parenting days. I really felt like when my son, my oldest, was a baby and he would cry, I felt like it was my duty to ensure that he stopped as soon as possible, right? And so little stirring in the crib, I'm picking up, I'm shushing, I'm jumping up and down, doing whatever I could to get my son to return to no tears, right? And when my son did cry, it was like, oh, I'm not doing a good job. I'm feeling anxious. I'm doing something wrong. There's a lot of pressure. It also was exhausting, right? Because one of the things that is true about babies is that they cry, and they cry a lot. And so as a result of that, it was a lot of work that I had to put in to stop that normal, natural process from happening. And as a result of my exhaustion, my wife's exhaustion, we realized this isn't sustainable, right? We can't achieve this. And so we had to shift, right? We had to shift. We had to figure out, okay, how much distress can I tolerate my child experiencing, right? And that was a big shift in both of us as parents. And through my work as a psychologist, I became more and more interested in actually the importance of exposing our children to distress, right? And what I've come to understand through a lot of the research and then some of the work that I do as an outpatient therapist is that exposure to distress is one of the best things that we can do for our children to help them grow up and be the resilient adults that we want them to be. So what we're going to be talking about today, first and foremost, is that distress is a normal part of life, right? In today's society, we overly pathologize negative emotions. Anxiety is a bad thing, right? But really, it's actually not a bad thing. Anxiety is a normal part of our day-to-day existence. And as a result of these unavoidable bad feelings, what becomes really important is how we learn to cope with them, right? And I'm going to go through a couple different ways that human beings can cope with distress and differentiate between healthier and unhealthier versions of coping. And from there, I'm going to talk a little bit about what families and schools can do together to help students build these necessary skills so that they can be resilient to the unavoidable discomfort and negative emotions that they will experience in their lives. So, one of the things that I really appreciate about being an adult is that I get to do things that I'm generally good at all the time, right? I'm fully grown. Through my growth, I realized at some point, hey, I may be good at this whole psychology thing, right? Maybe I should do that. And every day I get to wake up and I get to be a psychologist. And so I go through my life doing things where I have a lot of confidence and more natural ability. And I also don't have to do a whole lot of new learning. Sign me up for that. That's pretty sweet. Being a child is very different, right? The fact is that every experience as children grow up and continue to develop, it's new. There's so many new things. We're talking about this secondary school environment, this middle school life. Day to day, there are new experiences and feelings and changes that are going on. Talk about a rapid amount of change and maturation during this time in life. So a lot of new stuff is going on. In addition, with all this novelty, right, with all of these new things that our kids are being asked to learn, comes a tremendous amount of failure, right? We've all tried to learn something new in our lives. It's frustrating, right? There is a very good reason why I am not trying to learn a new language right now. And the good reason has nothing to do with the fact that it's not beneficial. It would be amazing to learn a new language. I'm very much desiring to learn a new language, but frankly, I am reluctant to struggle through it, right? To get the sentences wrong, to pronounce things wrong, to spell things wrong, etc. But our kids aren't so lucky. They have to be exposed to all these new things, some of which they're good at, some of which they aren't. But no doubt times where they will get things wrong, and they will be confused, right? And that will make them question their competence. And of course, disappointment, right? Difficulties with friendships, people not liking us, people saying no, right? Things not unfolding as expected. These are all normal parts of childhood, right? The stressful thing for parents is that we cannot shield our children from any of this. We know, we have to understand and accept that our children will experience a lot of really negative emotions. And if we reflect on it, if we're really open and honest with ourselves, the fact is that most of us, many of us, spend a decent percentage of our lives feeling miserable, right? Life can be a grind. Life's a challenge. There's a whole lot of demands and responsibilities and stressors, things in the world to worry about, things at home to worry about. There's a lot. There's a lot. So part of being human is experiencing some level of misery. And so for all of us to keep going, even though it's a grind, to keep getting up every day and facing the responsibilities and stressors that are an unavoidable part of life, requires us to feel bad. And it requires us to manage those feelings. And that's not a bad thing. The fact is, we do need stress in our lives in order to perform. What you're looking here is what's called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which basically talks about the relationship between arousal or stress and performance. And the fact is that we do not perform well unless we are experiencing some level of discomfort, right? In doing this talk for you all tonight, if you were to take some of my blood and look at the levels of cortisol or the stress hormone, it's much, much higher than it typically is. I want to do a good job. I want to express my ideas clearly. And it is that discomfort, right, that's getting me on my toes, leading me to think more quickly about the language that I want to use, increasing my attention and concentration to the task. Without stress, we tend to be tired, disconnected. I don't know about you, but I will have these days where I'll set aside, I'll say, I'm not going to do any scheduled meetings today. This is going to be the time where I'm going to catch up on this piece of paperwork, or I'm going to do this work that I haven't been able to get to for a while. And so I set the day aside, and then the day comes, and because I have all day and I'm not experiencing stress, all of a sudden I'm wasting time. It's amazing how long I can spend doing a Sudoku when I just take my time doing it, right? I get lost in that. Hours have gone by, and by the end of the day, I've only gotten done a quarter of what I thought I could accomplish. So we need stress. We need stress in our lives. And of course, too much stress will impact performance negatively, right? But distress in general can be a really good thing and can serve us. And the better we get at handling distress, the more we can tolerate while performing well. So it's also helpful to think about stress in sort of other aspects of the body, right? Our body has all of these responses to stress that make us stronger. And emotional stress is the same thing, right? Our body goes through a number of adaptations that can be very helpful in response to stress. One great example is our bones, right? What allows us to live a healthy life that decreases our risk of fracture? Using our bones, right? The slamming motion that happens when we run stresses our bones and creates a response that says, you know what, we got to maintain the strength of our bones. Or if we're kids, we've got to build more bones. We've got to leverage the calcium and vitamin D and all that stuff to increase the strength of our bones so that they can better handle the stress that they're being put under. If we want bigger muscles, we have to stress them. When we lift weights, we create small micro tears in our muscle tissue that then says, okay, if we want to not have these tears, we better make these muscles stronger. So the only way to become more resilient to injury is through the work, right? Is through the stress. Our immune system is another great example. One of the interesting things among many of going through the pandemic was that the protective measures that we took to decrease our risk of infection with COVID-19 also limited broader exposure to respiratory viruses. And so then when the masks came off, right, for most of us, when we got those first respiratory viruses, again, they were much more debilitating. And part of the reason for that was basically our immune systems were out of practice, right? Our immune systems were less resilient because they had less opportunity to practice their defenses against pathogens. There is a reason why little kids are super disgusting, right? Like little kids will play in the dirt and then put the dirt in their mouths. And we as parents rush forward with the wipes and things like that. But in reality, this is something that evolved. Kids are supposed to expose themselves to a bunch of really yucky things so that their body has an opportunity to build defenses to it. This is how we become more resilient. So the reason for continuing and hammering this home is that we can already think differently about how we respond when our children come to us in some sort of emotional distress. We can think our response doesn't need to be just what do I have to do to make you feel better? How can I support you in feeling better? It's how can you manage this feeling? How can you tolerate this feeling? How can you learn from this feeling so that you're more prepared for it in the future? That's a very important change in how we think about and respond to our children's emotional discomfort. When my children come and oh, I'm anxious, my response is great. That's awesome. Let's learn from that, right? I'm not trying to take it away from them because I know that their ability to sit with it and figure it out and learn about themselves through it will make it so that they're less anxious in the future and they're better able to face difficult situations. Okay, so I'm hoping, and you can weigh in the chat if you disagree, but I'm hoping that you're with me on this idea of changing our relationship to distress, right? That when our children come home and they've got a lot of homework and they're feeling really anxious and overwhelmed about it, that instead of saying, oh, what do we need to do? Let's get in touch with your teacher and get an extension or something like that. We're going to say, how do we manage this? Right? How do we manage this? I see there's a question coming in. Oh, agree. Thank you. That's our sort of a slight difference in response as a parent. We have to do, right, is help our children as we had to learn ourselves. How do we cope with this stress? Because life can be overwhelming. What can we do about this overwhelm to limit its impact, to make it so that we can continue to perform, right? To help us actually become more resilient. The idea of coping, we talk about coping skills, and it's this umbrella term, a cliche term, but generally what it means to cope is to do something to reduce emotional distress. Now, not all coping is of the same quality, right? So there's this difference between adaptive coping and avoidance coping. And where we start to get into trouble as human beings, where emotions start to really take control over our lives and lead to problems, is when we demonstrate a pretty consistent pattern of avoidance coping. So let's just go into this difference, right? Let's say that I have a report that I have to write that is due the next morning, and I'm not feeling pretty confident in it. So here I am, I'm writing, I'm feeling stressed out, I'm not going to get it done. I'm starting to feel a little bit overwhelmed. And so I decide to go for a walk. And during my walk, I try to think about the report a little bit differently. I remind myself that I've written reports like this before and they've turned out. I remind myself that it's not the end of the world. If this report isn't particularly good, right, all I can do is try my best. If someone's not happy with it, then that's okay. They're not happy with it. This is what's within my control. And as a result of this walk and the work that I do during the walk, I come back to the report and I jump right back in. That's an example of adaptive coping, right? Because I did something to reduce my distress, and in reducing my distress, I was able to return to the distressing situation more ready to face it. Now, a similar example with using this report is that I get up and I take a walk, and I walk for a long time, and I'm fretting, and I don't want to really think about the report. I decide to take out my phone. I'm playing a game on my phone, and that takes a while. And then I get off and I look at the report and I can't do it, and there's a block. And then I call up someone on the phone, or then I get something to eat. And then lo and behold, it's so late and I fall asleep and I don't get the report done, right? Maybe I email someone and say, oh, I'm sorry, the report's not going to be done. I'm sick. These are examples of avoidance coping. my distress is lower. So I am coping. I feel when I'm playing the game, when I'm walking, when I'm not producing the work, I feel a little bit better. Not all the way better. I still feel some sort of guilt, right? Maybe I feel some guilt or embarrassment or shame that I'm not getting this done, even though I know that I should. Uh, but but I am not feeling as overwhelmed and stressed as I was when I was sitting at the computer staring at the report that was not done. So it is coping, but it doesn't allow me to return to the distressing situation. I'm pushing it away. That's called avoidance coping. And when it becomes a pattern in life, in response to stress, I am not facing it. I'm moving away from it. This is where things become really problematic. And there are some good reasons for this about how this sort of pattern, becomes a real problem. And the big piece here is that the more that I avoid, the scarier the thing I'm avoiding becomes, right? So every time I walk away from the report and I feel a little bit better, it makes returning to the report more overwhelming. If I'm like a student and let's say I'm really anxious about going to class, and so I don't go to class, and then I think about going to class, oh no, that's going to be really terrible. So I avoid some more, and then it gets scarier, right? This is the type of cycle. This is the type of cycle that happens that turns a bit of anxiety and distress into more of an anxiety disorder over time, right? Where we're constantly responding to emotional discomfort by trying to move away from it, right? And during this process, what we don't ever learn is that we are capable of dealing with the emotion and pushing through. Important. Let's talk a little bit about some adaptive coping strategies, and then we'll talk about some avoidance coping behaviors and further differentiate these two things. One of the ways that we can adaptively cope is through thinking tools. As a psychologist, we call these cognitive tools. You may have heard of evidence-based intervention called cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. And the C in CBT stands for these thinking tools. And so one of the things that we want to look at to more adaptively cope is changing thoughts that increase our stress. There are all these different types of what we call thinking errors or cognitive distortions that increase our negative subjective experience. This is the worst thing in the world, right? I won't be able to cope with this. Or this person hates me, right? Or I know that I'm going to fail. If I don't get an A, it's the end of the world. These types of ways of thinking, as you can probably imagine, lead to a lot of anxiety and distress and discomfort. But of course, these types of thoughts are never helpful and are most of the time inaccurate. And so one of the thinking tools that we try to work on to increase resilience is, how do we start to learn how to identify what we're thinking? And when we identify a thought that's not helping us, right, that's not helping us to be more resilient, we try to change it. What's something believable that I can think about this that's a little bit different than what I was thinking before? Another thinking strategy is just focusing on the positive, right? In recognizing our discomfort, in recognizing that we're not in a good situation, we can reframe to, I'm going to learn something from this experience, right? I'm going to embrace this idea of no pain, no gain, right? Other thinking tools that continue to focus on the positive is, gosh, I'm finding when I'm really distressed that I focus on things that aren't going well. I focus on areas that I failed or haven't met my expectations. But instead, I'm going to switch it. I'm going to really try to focus and notice successes or positive things. As a general rule, we as human beings are not nearly as good at noticing positive or things that are going right than things that are going wrong. And so it can be difficult, but an important skill to practice noticing positive things. In fact, there is a research-based strategy that comes from a field called positive psychology, which is the study of mental wellness as opposed to mental illness, called 3 Good Things. And it's something that you could do with your family over dinner, right? But the challenge is, can everyone go around at dinner time and identify 3 good things that happened during the day, right? 3 meaningful good things. And this might seem easy, but it's harder than you think. And sometimes it can be a challenge to come up with real, genuine things. I also encourage kids to define in a reasonable way what success should be defined as, right? So if we define, oh, I've had a good day at school if I get everything right, or if all the kids like me, then I'm setting myself up for failure because that doesn't happen a whole lot. And so what really is success? I can walk away feeling successful if I spoke up for myself and asked for help during math class instead of just pretended that I knew the answer, right? These are the types of things. And so when you do it, okay, that's success. Another really important thinking tool is focusing on what we can control, right? Focusing on our own agency. We might be working with a teacher who we disagree with, or maybe who's not communicating super clearly, or maybe didn't respond to our request in exactly the way that we wanted to. You know what? And we can't necessarily do anything about that. So what can we control? Right? What can we control? That's something that you can do something about, right? And the more that we feel in control, the calmer we are. Part of anxiety is this feeling like something outside of us is dictating events for us, right? So there are a number of strategies that fall under these cognitive or thinking tool strategies. And these are just a few examples. But learning these approaches, learning these strategies, practicing these strategies can be unbelievably helpful in promoting resilience. The B in cognitive behavior therapy is behavior, right? What can I do? What actions can I take that allow me to move through an emotion, get to the other side of an emotion, tolerate the discomfort in order to return to the task at hand? I call these effective breaks, because not all breaks are the same. In my example of the difference between adaptive coping and avoidant coping, I took breaks in both, right? Both started out with a walk. What made the walk effective for me when I was engaging in adaptive coping was that I was able to return to the distress, right? And so this question is, how does an effective break work for me? For me. It looks different for each individual. Now, you might reflect personally on what are the things that you do in a day-to-day basis to take an effective break. What are your go-tos? And then further, you can ask yourself and reflect on, how did I learn that worked, right? Now, for me, I have 2 go-to behavioral strategies when I need to take a break. One is to get out in nature, right? Taking a walk in the woods is something that I know helps ground myself, helps me calm myself down so that I can return to a task. Now, how did I learn that? I can tell you how I didn't learn it. I didn't learn it by doing it for the first time when I was overwhelmed, right? It wasn't like I was really overwhelmed by something and all of a sudden I ran out and I found myself in the woods. And the second I got in the woods, I was like, I feel better, right? That's not how this happened. In fact, the way that I learned had nothing to do with distress or break taking at all. It was that I grew up in a family where we were out in nature a lot. I went on hikes a lot. We had a dog growing up. The dog needed walks. We were near a conservation land. And so that was one of the things that we did, would take the dog for walks. And so when I was calm, I was walking in the woods and I liked it. It felt good. So I created an association between the woods and walking and movement and relaxation. So now, when I experience stress, my brain goes to, hey, get out in nature. And the same thing for my other skill, which is listening to music. I found myself really interested in music from a young age, all sorts of different kinds, right? Always wanting to learn about new musicians, new records, the whole thing. And so as a result, when I'm stressed, I put on music. In fact, a lot of times I combine it. I go out in the woods, I have my phone and I play some music and I got my headphones in, and all of a sudden I'm in a much better place. And as I calm down, I'm now more open to thinking about my problem in a different way. So that's what it looks like for me. And for you, it may be something that's very different. And for your child, it may look very different. The question that I want to bring to the table is, does your child know what works? Have they learned, or are they still on that journey to figure out what works for them? And if they're still on that journey, that's a really important thing to talk about and to work on and to practice. So we've got these strategies, our thinking strategies and our behavior strategies, right? And the trickiest thing is using them, because emotions are strong, right? Discomfort, it creates a powerful impulse in us, right? One of the things that's really important to understand with regards to distress is that discomfort in general, these negative emotions evolved for a reason, right? There's a reason why these negative emotions feel bad, and they feel bad because they're designed to get our attention, right? Hey, you listening to me now? Right now that your stomach is in knots and your heart is racing, you listening to me? We're not okay. And the reason why it evolved, the thing that wasn't okay, was that there was a predator, right? Oh, there could be a bear out there. So I'm going to get your attention by making you feel bad. So you're going to look for that bear, and maybe you're going to run away from that bear. Maybe you're going to fight the bear. Maybe you're going to hide from the bear. So this discomfort leads to a natural response of, how do I get away from it? Now, the problem that we run into as human beings is that while society has evolved significantly from our hunter-gatherer ancestors, our emotional processing has not kept up. And so your children are experiencing discomfort in science class, and that discomfort is saying to them, you're in danger, right? But the danger is a chemistry concept that they don't understand, right? It's not a bear. It's not a lion, right? It's not a true threat, but our bodies have not evolved and adapted to change to the different types of stressors that we experience today, where many aspects of our safety are just taken for granted, right? And so because these messages are about survival, it's really hard to go against them, right? It's really hard to push back against what that distress is saying. Get away, this is bad, you're not okay. And so it becomes really hard to use the strategies, the effective break strategies, the thinking strategies. It becomes more of a challenge, especially for those individuals who maybe experience their emotions a little bit more strongly than the average bear, right? We all experience emotions differently. Some of us are not very sensitive to emotions, and some of us are very sensitive to emotions. So the more sensitive you are, the worse distress is going to feel, and the harder it is to push away that impulse. And as I was saying earlier, when we engage in these behaviors, when we listen to that impulse, we feel a little bit better. And over time, an association is made between the environment and distress, right? And sometimes we seek avoidance through relying on other people, right? So one of the ways that we, sorry about that, one of the ways that we can avoid is by asking for reassurance from adults, by asking adults to try to problem solve for us, right? And remove that distress. That's part of avoidance. And it works, right? It works in the short term, but it creates these long-term problems. Avoidance coping is a short-term solution to a long-term problem. Because in the long term, we will continually face emotional discomfort, frustration, disappointment, anxiety, sadness. And so even though in this moment we're trying to get someone to take it away from us or to do something to not face it, we know that we're going to face it again. Now, a quick just clarifying point, right? Some of you may be thinking, gosh, you got to avoid some things, right? And that's very true. If I came upon this sort of scary house, I would not go in, right? I can avoid the haunted house. I live out in Western Massachusetts. I live relatively close to a theme park out here. If people have been out to Six Flags out my way, and there's a ride called Superman, right? Terrifying roller coaster. And I'm someone who's the pinnacle of my ride excitement is like the swing set, right? So, or the teacups or something like that. So when my family goes to Six Flags, they all like to go on Superman. I don't go. I will never go, but I can avoid it, right? The worst thing that happens if I avoid it is that my family teases me a little bit, which is something that I'm very okay with, given the fact that I don't have to go on the ride. So yes, there are some things that we can avoid, but there are many things that we can't. And school has many things that we cannot avoid, right? We cannot avoid evaluative situations in life, or at least it is exceedingly difficult to avoid being evaluated, to being critiqued in some way, right? It's really hard to avoid being in places with lots of people. And as a result, it becomes really tricky when we think, okay, how do we do this for the rest of our lives, right? It's just not something that we can consistently avoid. We can't avoid hearing thoughts and opinions that we disagree with or that make us somewhat uncomfortable, right? That's not something in life that we can avoid. There is going to be conflict and debate and differences of opinion, whether that be in our close relationships, our family relationships, our friendships, in the workplace. So in life, we're going to face things that make us feel uncomfortable. These things are unavoidable. And so as a result, we can't rely on avoidance coping to manage them. This, I think, is so important. We're seeing in today's youth a real increase in anxiety disorders, right, writ large, especially in girls. And part of what makes an anxiety disorder worse is when we consistently accommodate away situations that elicit anxiety. And we seek to remove that anxiety as opposed to helping our child experience and face their anxiety more directly so that they can overcome those feelings of discomfort and learn, oh, this emotion gets better over time. Or, oh, this thing that I was so worried about happening, gosh, it didn't happen that way. This is the key to growth. So just to go into avoidance a little bit more, like as you're thinking about maybe your own coping or your child's way of coping, right? First of all, we all engage in some of this at some point. Again, what makes this problematic is when it becomes a more consistent pattern. But some things to look out for, right? There's something called overt situational avoidance, which is basically, I'm not doing it, right? Someone who says, I'm not going to soccer practice anymore. I'm not participating, I'm quitting the soccer team. right? They don't think I'm good. They won't play me, all that stuff. That would be overt situational avoidance. Emotion-driven behaviors are basically when the going gets tough, I get going, right? I'm in math, but I don't understand the concept. And so I take off, right? I go see the counselor, or I go take a walk. I say I need to go to the bathroom when I actually don't, right? These types of things. Subtle behavioral avoidance are these sort of minor things that we try to do to dampen our discomfort, right? So maybe we have to have a difficult conversation with a teacher because we're missing some homework, and so during the talk we don't look them in the eye. That might be like subtle behavioral avoidance. Cognitive avoidance is where we try not to think about something that's stressful. And the biggest thing that kids today use is like social media and smartphones to cognitively avoid, right? The success of things like TikTok and Instagram is based on the fact that cognitive avoidance is addictive, right? I'm just gonna, the next video, the next video, the next video, the next video. I've had the opportunity to talk with a lot of middle and high school students, and so many of them talk about when they get overwhelmed, they want to jump on their phone, right? They want to jump on TikTok because it makes them feel a little bit good, but then they struggle to get off. So that's a type of what's called cognitive avoidance, right? You're filling your brain with something else. Then another avoidance behavior type is called safety signals, and that's basically needing someone else to be okay. So maybe it's, oh, I can only do this if my friend is there with me, right? I won't go to class if my friend is absent. Or maybe it's, I need my counselor there. Or I need you to be with me at dinner so that I can order my own food. These types of things, that's called a safety signal, right? I'm only okay if I'm with X person or X thing, right? These are all types of avoidance, right? Some are more blatant than others. I'm not doing it, I'm not going. That's obviously more obvious than, oh, I'm going to avoid a social situation by looking at my phone instead of saying hi. Some are more obvious than others, but they're all avoidance, and they all can contribute to ongoing discomfort. So I want to tell you a little bit of a story that I tell my clients that I work with, adults, kids, everyone, to better understand this phenomenon of like discomfort and avoidance, and what I'm hoping that they can achieve instead, right? What is a better? And so the story is unfortunately not a true story, because it starts out with every Saturday morning I cook a really big breakfast for my family. So my family wishes that were true, but unfortunately it's not. But I say I cook this breakfast for my family, and it includes bacon. And unfortunately, I'm no good at cooking bacon. I cook it on the stove top, and I'm no good with the heat. And so as a result, the heat gets too high, the bacon starts to burn, and when it burns, there's smoke. And eventually, there's enough smoke in the kitchen that the smoke detector goes off. And then I will talk to the person that I'm working with, and I will give them 3 options for what I do in response to the smoke detector going off. The first is I run out of the house screaming fire at the top of my lungs. The second option that I present to them is I go through the house step by step, methodically looking for a possible fire, right? Before feeling like I'm okay. So I check everywhere. And the third is that I calmly go get my step stool, climb up, unscrew the smoke detector, and put it outside so that it goes off. And I don't know about you, but I always choose option 3. I get that step stool, I unscrew the smoke detector, and I put it outside. So then I will ask, why do I do that? Why do I do that? And the response is typically something like, you knew that it was from the bacon, right? You knew that it was from the bacon. So yes, it was not a real alarm. It was a false alarm, right? The smoke detector was going off and it was saying fire, even though there was not a fire. Okay. Then the next question I ask is, if I know that it's a false alarm, why do I go through all the trouble of getting the step stool, climbing up, unscrewing the smoke detector, putting it outside, right? I have to remember to put it back later on, right? I don't want to leave my kitchen without a smoke detector for a few weeks. So I gotta remember, I gotta take the step stool out, I gotta put it away, all this work. Why do I go through all the trouble? Why don't I just keep cooking the bacon, right? And just let the smoke detector go off in the background. And eventually we get to the answer, which is that the smoke detector, that sound it makes is really painful, right? In fact, it's designed to be painful, right? Imagine a smoke detector that when it went off, it played smooth jazz, right? And then all of a sudden, I'm just bopping my head along to the music. I'm not responding to the fire. But because it's a horrible, piercing beep, it's so hard to ignore. I've got to do something about it. So the reason why I unscrew the smoke detector and put it outside is because it hurts. It's painful. So basically, putting it all together is when the alarm goes off, I don't listen to what the alarm says, but I do treat the pain the alarm is causing. And this is the relationship to our discomfort, our emotional discomfort. When we experience emotional discomfort, I'm not listening to what it's saying, which is, get away, you're in danger, this is terrible, right? The world's coming apart. I don't listen to that. But what I need to do is engage in a behavior or a thinking strategy that helps reduce the pain that I'm experiencing in that moment. Because that emotion sure is uncomfortable. It's just not giving me the right message, right? It's not giving me the right message. And remember, it's important that the smoke detector, that this distress signal is designed for survival. So for all of us, when we feel this discomfort, for all of us, the vast majority of the time, it's a false alarm, right? Because we're not in danger. Now, there are times where we may be in danger, when that alarm really does indicate that we are not safe. And when that happens, we absolutely want to be following that message, right? We do want to run away or hide or fight. But the vast majority of the time, the message doesn't work, doesn't fit the situation. And to cope is to learn how to manage the pain the alarm is causing without listening to what the alarm is saying. Okay. So now let's shift a little bit to, what's the schools and what is the parental role in building these skills and helping kids better able to not listen to what the alarm is saying and instead treat the pain the alarm is causing? The first thing that schools can do first and foremost is building strong relationships with students, right? The strong relationship and building a strong classroom community is what allows students to be more comfortable experiencing distress. Creating that environment allows for healthy risk-taking. So just a question here, how do we discuss or change the cognitive avoidance path? So that's a really good question. There's a few different things, right? One thing that can be important to talk about is, are you actually able to return to the task at hand? Do you feel stuck in whatever you're doing to cognitively avoid? So you might ask the child to reflect on whether it's truly helpful or not for them, whether it comes with some longer term consequences. Some of the cognitive avoidance things that we see is that it leads to further procrastination. And then the child is really panicking because they're like way behind on all sorts of assignments. So we want to reflect on, is this actually helping me? Or am I just trying to numb myself out for a little bit? So that's one thing. Another is by talking more directly about the thing that is leading to cognitive avoidance, right? And we can ask, what is so bad about this thing that's leading you to want to just zone out in TikTok or Instagram or something, right? What are you afraid is going to happen? And when you hear that fear, one of the things that we can ask as a follow-up is, and if that happened, if that thing happened, do you think you'd be able to cope with it? Or has something like that ever happened before? And were you able to get past it? One of the things that happens again is that we as human beings have a hard time stopping ourselves from listening to the alarm, right? So we just go right to the TikTok app without thinking, wait a second, should I be doing this? Is this a good idea? So we want to slow them down and get them to engage with what's actually stressing them out. And then also think about the pros and cons of using that strategy and whether it is really working for them in the long term. So I hope that's a great question. I hope that's helpful. So we need those relationships first and foremost. We also need to be spending some time really talking about the inevitability of stress and the different ways that we can cope with stress. One of the things that makes AMSA such a fantastic school is its academic rigor, right? But with that academic rigor comes a lot of distress. So we got to be really open about it, right? Yes, there are going to be some hard times. There's going to be some frustration. There's going to be some insecurity. Am I good enough? Can I do it? That is going to be a part of it. That's completely normal. And we need to teach you some skills about how to notice when you're stressed and how to cope with things more adaptively and how to notice when you're engaging in some avoidance coping behaviors. As a school, we also have to expose kids to some break strategies, right? And recognize that kids need breaks. One thing, I do a lot of professional development for schools. And so I'll be speaking in front of a big auditorium full of teachers and other school staff. And I think it's always funny because I will say very explicitly, listen, I understand how hard it is to sit and listen for a long time. So I'm going to talk for around 40 minutes. We're going to take a 15-minute break. So don't take a break, just wait for me. But inevitably, if a faculty member is feeling restless or whatever, they get up and walk. They take their break. Students need breaks too. And so we've got to be able to understand that and provide space for students to take breaks and to learn what strategies work for them. In addition, what schools can also do is when students are showing signs of overwhelm, if we go back to that sort of Yerkes-Dodson law, where it's like the relationship between arousal and performance. And we see as arousal or stress gets super duper high, performance goes down. So there's going to be certain students who are more in the overwhelm category of things. When those things happen, we have to recognize, okay, we can put some short-term accommodations in place, right? But also when those short-term accommodations are necessary, we can't just keep them as is, right? We have to teach some skills so that we can get back to the typical demands. So these accommodations that we put into place, we have to be willing to provide, but they've got to be short term. They can't be forever because those things aren't sustainable. And so really what one of the things that schools are grappling with, right, is how do we balance accommodation with skill building? How do we recognize that students may be struggling and are at different levels of ability and in stress tolerance and their resilience to emotional discomfort? And we may need to provide some accommodations, but wait a second, we can't just take everything off the table, right? Because that just won't work in the long term. That's not something that will carry with them throughout life. They will eventually face an environment that requires them to manage the demands regardless of their resilience capacity. So what we're after here is what's sort of in their tolerable zone of discomfort, right? And so we want to put some accommodations in place, not to reduce all distress, but to reduce enough distress so that the child can manage their discomfort at a reasonable level. And once they learn how to manage that discomfort, it can't stay that way forever, that accommodation. Then we have to start fading it back, right? We have to start fading it back. One of the things that's always really impressed me with AMSA and the counseling department is that they've been committed to this skill building process and in helping kids learn the tools so that they can face greater demands and meet the high expectations that AMSA has for its students. So there's this need in schools to balance accommodation with skill building. And a big message is that I have for you all tonight is that we can't just permanently accommodate away emotional discomfort, right? We can't say, oh, this situation makes the child anxious, so how do we remove it? Because when we do that, the message that we send to the student is that they're not capable of managing distress, right? Now, I'm not suggesting that we say, well, tough it out. It's not that. We may need to put some accommodations in place, but the accommodations have to go hand in hand with skill building so that we can reintroduce those expectations as soon as possible. So we may run into a situation where a student is overwhelmed by the amount of homework that they're being asked to complete, and as a result, they're not turning in assignments. And then as their grade goes down, they get more overwhelmed and they now feel embarrassed or ashamed and don't feel like they can ask for help from the teacher, right? Feel like the teacher's mad at them. They hate me. They think I'm stupid. Now all of a sudden we're avoiding class, or we're continuing to not do homework and digging a hole deeper and deeper. So a school might say, maybe thinking, okay, there's a skill here that needs to be taught around how to manage this homework demand. And so maybe in the short term, we've got to reduce the amount of homework that we're asking for. But we can't just have less homework forever. We have to teach, is this how do I cope with it? Is it an executive functioning challenge? I got to help the child schedule and prioritize how to get their work done. Is it a self-advocacy skill that needs to be taught so that the student feels more comfortable independently asking their teacher for help, because maybe they're not doing their homework because they didn't understand it in class, but didn't want to appear as stupid in front of their peers by asking a question. So we may reduce the demand for a little bit, but not forever. Another example is a student who's experiencing anxiety and asking to see the counselor repeatedly, right? We may put in some accommodations where we increase the amount of check-ins that a student has with a counselor throughout the day, maybe plan them out. But we also can't just say, okay, go see the counselor whenever you feel a negative emotion, because that's not sustainable. When I'm feeling overwhelmed, I can't just call up my therapist on speed dial, right? I've got to learn how to compartmentalize and manage my own emotional discomfort. And so we may increase check-ins at first, but then we're working on skills to more independently cope with stress. And so then we fade out those adult times. This is hard work, but this is the approach that schools are having to grapple with in ensuring that they are teaching their students to be increasingly independent in managing their discomfort. Now, there's also a lot that parents can do in partnership with school to reinforce and teach these same skills. And before I get into those things, I want to just put out this disclaimer, right? As I said, I'm a parent of 2 children, right? And I would say that both of my children, and really up and down my family, we're on the more anxious side of things, right? And so they experience distress. And they're the old adage of you're only as happy as your least happy child certainly rings true to me, right? So when they're in distress, I'm in distress. In middle school, I don't know about you all, but the level of insecurity that I am just generally around with 2 middle school children on a daily basis can be overwhelming, right? Whether I'm not good looking enough, I'm not cool enough, I don't have enough friends, I'm not smart enough, this, that, and the other. There's a lot of self-doubt and a lot of requests for reassurance, right? Which is a form of avoidance coping. Tell me I'm okay. Tell me I'm okay. I'm smart, right? I'm smart, right? So they ask and ask. It is way easier for me to reassure them, to reduce their distress and thereby reduce my distress, right? Highly motivated for that. And so I will absolutely engage in parenting behaviors that reduce that distress, right? I will engage in that avoidance with them. But I also know that it's not doing me any favors, because what it's leading to is that the next time they feel any sort of discomfort or self-doubt, they're right back to me asking for that reassurance. Just what can parents do? I want just to make sure that it's coming from a place of me doing the same things too, me making the same mistakes, even though I'm a psychologist and I'm talking with parents every day about this type of stuff. So what can parents do to build resilience skills? The first is not jump to problem solving, right? Not jump in to solve your child's problem. We want to validate how bad it feels, because there's no doubt that it feels uncomfortable. And we want to cheerlead them and believe in them and their ability to problem solve and figure things out. Believe in their ability to get past their emotional discomfort, right? I know you got this. You got this. You'll be able to get through this. I believe in you. In addition, we want to focus on distress tolerance, not removing distress, right? So how are you going to manage this feeling, not what can we do to get this feeling to go away? An example, your child comes to you and says, my friend hates me, they don't like me anymore. The focus on removing distress would be, oh, I'm sure that they like you just fine, right? I'm sure that they like you. You have nothing to worry about. The focus on distress tolerance would be, it is really hard to feel insecure about our friendships, right? That's just like a really tough emotion to experience. What would be something that you could do to help get past this difficult moment? Finding opportunities for exposure. This is also crucial. And what I mean by exposure is exposure to discomfort. There are all sorts of opportunities in life to face challenges, right? To take healthy risks. And I'll give a really good example. This happened last summer. We were on a road trip to visit my in-laws in Michigan. And so we were driving out from Massachusetts to Michigan, and we wanted to stop for a meal. And what is ubiquitous on the highway to Michigan is Subway, right? And we pull over to Subway. My daughter is a vegetarian, and so she wants the veggie sub. My son, who because my daughter is a vegetarian and they can have a bit of a sibling rivalry at times, self-identifies as a meatitarian. And so he went first in ordering, and he ordered one of those sandwiches where like every animal was on that sandwich, right? And so he orders his sandwich, and then it goes to her veggie sandwich. And as she's making the sandwich, the woman sort of comments, oops, I forgot to change my gloves. And then she goes on making the sandwich. And so now my daughter knows that the gloved hands that touched all the different meats are now touching her vegetables and putting it in the sandwich. So the woman goes about making the sandwich, and my daughter's getting increasingly stressed out. And she wants me to tell or ask the woman to make her a new sandwich. Unfortunately for my daughter, she has a clinical psychologist who works with anxiety as a father. And so I say no, right? No, you can ask yourself. An opportunity for exposure. So she is not happy with me. And we go through, she gets the sandwich, I pay for it, she doesn't ask. And then my daughter is sitting at the table, everyone else is eating and enjoying their lunch, and she's not eating. And finally, the hunger gets to her enough where she goes up and says, excuse me, I'm a vegetarian. You said that you didn't. She actually goes through it. And the woman says, I'm so glad you said that. I'm really sorry. All Subway people are supposed to change our gloves after each sandwich. It's my fault. I will make you a new one." And she was really sweet about it and actually gave her a free cookie. In that moment, it would have been easier for me to just take care of it for her. But it was a great opportunity for her to have to self-advocate, to face the possibility that the woman would be mad at her, right? And then to see, gosh, this woman acted with kindness in response. What a great thing, right? So finding opportunities for exposure whenever possible. Practicing independent coping when calm, right? Doing activities together, trying new things that might be associated with calmness, right? With relaxation. Incorporating that into the routines. And then another really important component of resilience skills is building habits that promote mental health and resilience. That includes things like engaging in positive activities, right? Talking positively about things that are going on in life, getting a good night's sleep, right? Good sleep hygiene, engaging in contributing activities, right? Doing things for others, reflecting on successes. All of these types of things get us in a more positive mindset, right? And better prepare us for stressors as they occur. So one thing, if you're thinking about, oh gosh, my child runs into these difficulties with stress and it impacts school, one of the things to think about is, what can we do in the morning? How can we change our morning routine to help this child be in a more positive frame of mind, right? What can we do each night to focus on success and areas of overcoming difficulty? So these are a bunch of really important things that we can do that build resilience. And again, it comes down to grappling with the discomfort as opposed to trying to remove the discomfort, right? When a child comes back with a complaint about their teacher, talking with them about the email that they're going to write to their teacher to have the conversation and hash the problem out, instead of writing the teacher yourself with the concerns the child has, right? These are all the types of examples that focus more on distress tolerance and independent problem solving as opposed to removing distress for them. So another really important thing that parents can do when supporting their child in building resilience is thinking strategically about how you want your child to grow during their time in school. What is your vision for how you want your child to manage these stressors? And start with the end goal in mind. So what I mean by that is, if your ultimate end goal is to have a child who can confidently self-advocate for their needs, having a child who will feel confident going to an open office hours in college, right, with a professor because they have a question, or someone who will feel confident raising their hand in class and saying, "I don't know, can you explain that to me again?" If that's your vision for your child and you want them to be able to do that, then the question is, what are all the things that we are doing that prepare them to meet that expectation, right? So how is the way that the school is responding and how I'm responding as a parent that helps me meet that goal? And if there's something that I'm doing that, or the school is doing, that stops that goal from being achieved, we need to address it. So in this example, my child comes home and says to me something like, "Oh, math teacher didn't explain this well, and I can't do the homework, and this stinks, and everyone's going to think that I'm stupid," right? If my vision for my child is being okay with not knowing something, or if my vision for my child is to be able to openly acknowledge and seek that extra help, then I know that when I reach out to, if I reach out to email the teacher and solve it for them, that I'm actually not doing them a service in helping them achieve what I think is an important vision for them. So instead, I want to think about, okay, so what skills do I need to teach them so that they can meet that vision? And then who is going to teach them these skills? So I may want to reach out to my child's counselor and say, gosh, my daughter is really struggling with self-advocacy. Are there any skills that you can teach her in that area? Can you have some conversations and some approaches that she can use to better use her voice and get her needs met in class? That's a great thing, I think, for a parent to be able to advocate for their child, right? How are we going to get these skills in place? And then I'm also going to want to really ask about, and how will we know if the student's doing better, right? So maybe it's, for this example, it's like homework. So maybe I'm gonna ask the counselor to talk with them and to teach them some self-advocacy skills, and then I'm gonna pay attention to their homework, right? Because if their homework's getting in more, it means that they're probably better self-advocating because they're getting their needs met and they're actually understanding the material before the homework is given. So there are these times, and I've experienced this too, where your child is coming to you with distress, they're struggling with something, and the pull is to go and have the adults talk and what can we do to make this thing go away? But if your vision is for a child who can independently manage these challenges, then what that inherently means is that the focus needs to shift on how do I teach this child to actually do that better so that they don't simply just come to me for the rescue. Just a couple resources that I just want to highlight here before we end and open up to questions. But one is something called the Let Grow Project, and the idea is opportunities for exposure. It requires the child to choose something to do independently that they've never done independently before, and so it's a really nice way of framing healthy risk taking, right? Getting outside one's comfort zone and realizing that you can handle it. The second one is this video that explains in child-friendly language avoidance coping and why it's not helpful. And then there's a resource around mental health prevention and some of the proactive things that we can do to support resilience. And then finally, for those parents who maybe are here because you have a child who's struggling with anxiety or struggling to manage distress, there's a link here to something called the SPACE treatment. SPACE is supporting parents around anxious childhood emotions. And this is actually an evidence-based intervention that reduces anxiety in children that's only focused on parents. And the idea is more in-depth explanation of some of the things that we talked about today, right? Which is not accommodating away the anxiety, but more focused on coaching and supporting the child through that anxious distress. It's a great time if there are any questions about anything that I talked about today. If you want to use the Q&A or the chat to put those in, I'll give a minute or two for those to come in, and hopefully some folks have some additional comments or questions before we end for the evening. I'm not seeing any. I understand it can be a quiet on Zoom here. Appreciate those who joined. Remember that this is being recorded, so folks will have an opportunity to watch it at a different time. If you want to revisit any of the information that we talked about tonight. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kate.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hirschberg. It's great to have you. Thanks to everyone who attended. Always feel free to reach out to the counseling department if you have any questions, and we're happy to share resources that we have or work with you to support your kids. It's always one of the best parts of our jobs is seeing students develop skills, and resilience is really important in today's world. So thank you.